It's 5:30, so as always, we will kick off right now on time. Um, Tonight we have the pleasure of hearing from Dylan Keath, who not only knows about AI, but is a leading practitioner. But before introducing Dylan, I just want to make the usual housekeeping rules and guidance, and that is Dylan will be presenting for 25, 30 minutes. We then have Q&A. Q&A will come through, as always, through the chat function. Brian Timms will not be moderating the Q&A tonight. I will be doing that. But we hope that Brian's able to resume that soon. The Q&A and the chat function in particular is there for questions and answers or for questions. Please do not use it for idle comment, either on the speaker or on the chair or anybody else. I think that's as much as we need. There are no bars on this, and Dylan can confirm that. I think if you hear something tonight, I think you're allowed to repeat it. So it's not the standard rules that we would have, Chatham House. So it's my pleasure to now turn to Dylan. Dylan has given me the briefest of biographies, but I'm pleased to be able to say that because he is a member of the Athenaeum Club Choir, I have managed to acquire a little bit more information. And importantly, Dylan, I would have to say, is one of those exceedingly bright people who went to university and didn't know what to do. Dylan can tell us himself about how many courses he did, but he chopped and changed as many bright people do, trying to find what was going to be really interesting. And I think that's what he's now found. He's now at National Australia Bank, where he is in charge of bringing technology to marketing and communication. So, and one of the things I think we want to hear from Dylan is in particular in particular is how this is being integrated within AI, how AI is being integrated within a large, complex organisation. Now, I'm going to hand over to Dylan without much further ado, but I do notice that Peter Bennell has again started screen sharing, and since we need the screen to be shared by Dylan, Peter, could you please cancel that once again?
How do I cancel it again?
Same as you did last time. Joel, do you want to comment? You can unmute. You're the most technical. Joel Burns.
Never had this before.
you got to. So if you want to give some guidance to Peter.
Yeah, I found it up the top here. Is it right now?
Yep, that's great. All right, thank you. Okay.
New computer I've got.
Right, Dylan, over to you.
Can I just check that that's working?
It says started. It says starting to screen share.
Yeah,
okay. It's showing,
but we can't see it yet.
Nothing yet?
No.
Oh dear.
I'm glad you came early and tried this out.
It did work. All right. Oh, hang on. What does that mean?
I can confirm it worked, but maybe you need to talk to Peter Bennell now.
I've got a new computer. That's why I was having trouble.
All right. I'm going to try a second
in a
time.
different position.
Hang on.
I'm not sharing still, am I, John?
Not according to my screen. No.
Thank you.
So no, I think you're scot-free on this one.
Oh, dearie me. Sorry, chaps. Just give me. Oh, sorry, folks. Just give me a second.
So there we are.
That's better.
All right.
Yep,
we got something.
All right.
All mute, please, other than Dylan. Thank you.
Well, thanks, John, for the opportunity. Yeah, I'm very excited to be to talking to you all tonight, and I'll go through some slides, but then I do hope to have quite a rich Q&A. So please, lots of tricky, curly questions. I think makes for a good Q&A. So as John mentioned, I currently work at National Australia Bank, and I've worked in banking for about 20 years. I started in credit. I've worked in strategy, various operational roles, but then about 8 or 9 years ago, found myself in marketing. And since I've been in marketing, I've really been working at that intersect of marketing data and technology. And for those, I'm sure many will know, but in a large organisation, the marketing org is often one of the largest users of data in the way it goes about its operations. So I've been very fortunate to spend a lot of time with large data sets and marketing at a fantastic brand that's NAB. So this evening, kind of three parts. The first part is just to do a bit of a level set around generative AI. I'm sure most people are across it to a certain degree, but there's a few concepts that I want to go through. Then I want to move into what I'm calling 5 considerations for leaders. And this is like some of the bigger, more important topics, but certainly 5 of the big challenges or considerations that I've come across in my work at the bank, building out these generative AI applications. And then finally, we'll have a bit of a Q&A. So, I'm sure everyone's well aware that AI has been around since for a very long time. It's nothing particularly new as a concept, certainly around since the 50s where the term was coined. It's gone through various phases. So I think, from in the 60s, there was some pretty rudimentarily early progress. I think in the 70s, it's often referred to as the first AI winter, which is where enthusiasm for the technology started to wane as the capabilities kind of didn't live up to the promise. But it did yield what was the boom through the 80s, which was a set of technologies called expert systems, which are applications that are very rules-based and logic-based and sort of work through particular patterns, but they're very domain-specific and they have quite a narrow focus. So soon there was another kind of lull in interest where the really narrow application of expert systems was seen not to have that broad general intelligence that what people were interested in. Then the 90s came around, and machine learning was the concept that a lot of people, it really started to gather steam. I think, many will remember Deep Blue and the victory, the chess victory, and neural networks was the technology that really started coming out. Then in the 2000s, we started hearing about big data and having these big data sets and a lot more compute. The computing power of our computers increased, and that led us to be able to start doing some pretty interesting applications, like speech recognition being one of the interesting ones through that time. Then in 2010, that moved into what we think of as deep learning. And in particular, the thing that was yielded from this time was reinforcement learning, which is absolutely a critical concept for the intelligence of the models that we've got today. And then importantly, in 2017, Google invented this little thing called the transformer. And the one piece of technology that has yielded all of this large language model, generative AI type capability that we now enjoy was that one architectural discovery from Google called the transformer. It's pretty well accepted that they probably didn't know what they'd discovered at the time, and of course it was OpenAI, another company that took it and created that first explosion of ChatGPT. But Google's kind of certainly recently come back and has got some pretty interesting work. So long history of AI, but the thing that's that's the real disruption is that this current form of AI, this generative AI, is AI that creates. It's so analytical AI, certainly very much part of the world. It's fantastic at analysing the past and to a certain extent predicting the future. Very good at recognising patterns, and we of course ask a lot of questions about data through analytical AI. But it's the generative AI, which is what we'll be talking about this evening. And that's really about the words and pictures and code and experiences that are creating the future. It's very good at learning from patterns. And of course, it generates a novel output, although there is, of course, a bit of discussion around how new and original the output from these generative AI models are, and we can talk about that in a little bit. One of the key concepts and the things that's really allowed all sorts of interesting use cases with generative AI is this concept of multiple modes or multiple modality. And so I think many of us have probably our first times that we engaged with ChatGPT would be through text. So, you enter in a text prompt and then you get a text answer. Some people have maybe put in a text prompt and then received an image out. So give me a photo of a cat. You can also put into some of these models, put an image in and then get an image back out. So you could put an image of your cat in and ask for a hat to be put on your cat, and you could get that back out. But the new models are also having sound in and sound out. So these, for those who have tried to use Siri on an Apple device, pretty underwhelming voice assistant capability. The equivalent voice assistants that are backed by these new generative AI models are absolutely fantastic. And if you get the opportunity to try out advanced voice mode on ChatGPT, I'd encourage you to do so. It's really quite an incredible experience. And as we'll see in a minute, there's also plenty of examples of text in or image in and video out. So when you add up all of these capabilities, you get some pretty interesting use cases. I think the first one, which is a relatively common one, is being able to create some really incredible photorealistic images. And so this image here was created by an application called Midjourney. The prompt that I used to create the image is there on the left. And so if you kind of think about disruption, and certainly in my field in marketing, the disruption of your traditional creative processes and services. I mean, to create this sort of photo using real people in a real setting is, as you can imagine, many days of work and many thousands of dollars of expense. However, this was something that could be generated by a pretty simple prompt there. And there are certainly some brands out there at the moment that are using this sort of technology to create advertisements to put in front of their customers. The next one is an example of a video, an AI-generated video that's been turned into an advertisement. So I might just cross my fingers that the video is going to play properly.
This is the story of how a family escaped their pricey telco. It begins with a woman trying a eSIM and getting 120 gigs of data for just $35 every renewal for 12 renewals. Then she quietly thought to herself, that's a good deal. So she told her husband, now he streams more sport and pays less. Then she told her parents, now they get legendary service and pay less. Then she told her son, didn't reply, so she signed him up. And now we've told you, so escape your pricey telco with a eSIM.
So that's a current Australian brand with a current Australian advertisement. that's been completely AI generated. Now, think what you will about the quality of that creative and the creative idea. It still absolutely blows me away that all of that footage didn't exist until someone went and prompted an AI in order to generate it. So some pretty incredible stuff. This the AI is certainly fantastic at generating text, and code. The code that runs our applications is text, and so the AI's ability to generate code is really quite incredible. And so here's a little video of me. It's a pretty silly little example, but basically this is a piece of software called Firebase Studio. It's owned by Google, and what I'm doing here is I'm asking it to create an app for me. One of the things I'm quite interested in is a brand's personality and how that personality is expressed through its tone of voice in copy. And so just as something a little bit fun, I asked Firebase to create me an app that would allow me to enter in the URL of a brand like qantas.com.au or Adidas or Nike, and asked it to go and review that website to read all the copy on that website and then analyze it and tell me what brand, to analyze the brand and describe to me using one of the Jungian 16 personality archetypes, what archetype best lined up against that brand. And so the way that I described it to you is to you all is basically what I entered into the app. That was about the extent of my instruction. I recorded this in real time, so I might just skip forward a little bit, but you can see it's doing some thinking. It's writing some code. And here we go. This is what it's come up with as the app for us to have a look at. I didn't specify any of this. I didn't give it a name. I didn't tell it what it needed to look like. These are all decisions that the AI has made itself. You might notice that it's identified that there's an error. So it's fixing that error, and it's about to tell me that that error is completed, and now I can give it a try. I forget which brand I did first, but
Qantas.
There we go, qantas.com.au. And so what's happening in the background is this application is sending a request out to the Qantas website, is reviewing all the copy off that website, is then using some logic to try and identify what, using what it knows about the Jungian personality archetypes, and then it's decided that the Explorer is the archetype that's, best represents Qantas. That kind of makes sense. And then it's developed a bit of a graphical representation of the various dimensions. So, if we think about this as a capability, what that could mean for the way that we consume applications, we pay for software, this did not exist. This has been absolutely created as a result of me writing that prompt. And now I would be able to, if I wanted to, share this, maybe put a paywall in front of it and charge people $1 to use it. I'm not sure who'd buy, but anyway, fantastic capability. So I think kind of the key takeout here is, because these generative AIs can generate text, they can generate code, and then when you give those AIs the ability to do something with that code, they can then generate applications for you. Now, this next concept is an important one, because over the last, I guess probably a year or so, these AIs have gotten a lot smarter than they were, and they've gotten smarter through a method that's different to the way that all the previous improvements in intelligence were gained. So initially, when these large language models were developed, the way that you got a smarter model was you trained it on larger data sets and you used more compute, and then you ended up with a model with more parameters in it, and that would make it more intelligent. But that had its limits, and we kind of reached the frontier of how big you could make these models, and how much data there was available just in the world to train them was another limiting factor. And so then the research moved to, okay, so what are some other things that we can do to make these models be able to do more for us to appear smarter? And one of the things that was that people came up with relatively early was this idea of breaking down one complex problem into chunks and asking the LLM, the AI, to think step by step through a problem, and that had a huge impact on the quality of the outputs that you would get. Then fast forward maybe 6 months, and the model producing companies started building that concept of chain of thought, of getting the model to think through the steps into the underlying model itself. And so now when we ask one of these special reasoning models a question, in the background, it is taking your question, chunking it down, and then thinking through how to answer that question or solve that problem step by step. And that's created a real uptick in intelligence. So that was the first thing that happened with reasoning models. And then the second thing that happened with reasoning models is the AIs were allowed to use tools and to make choices to use when they would like to use what tool. And so the example that I've got here is two tools that are relatively common for these reasoning models to be able to use. The first one is Google for Google search, and then the second one is Python, or a coding environment where the model can write its own code and execute it to try and help you answer the question. And to give you a bit of an example of how this might play out, if the question that I was asking the large language model was, let's say, like, rank all 60s or 70s Formula One drivers and give me some analysis about their childhood racing statistics. I don't know, something like really obscure and hard to answer like that. If I put that question into the large language model, the first thing it will do is it will break that down and start thinking about, okay, what might the steps be for me to take to answer that question? All right, the first step might be to get a list of 70s Formula One drivers. Do I know that? Is that built into my training data, or is that something that I want to go to Google and search for? And if it is something to go and search Google for, the AI will go and do that search itself. It will return the results from that search, and it will look through those results itself. It mightn't show them to me immediately, but it will have those results. And then let's say that it wanted to create some sort of chart to show me. It thought that the best way to answer my question would be to create a chart showing the various performance of Formula One drivers over time. It might then go and write some code to create a chart within Python and then return that chart to me as part of the answer. And so this concept of the large language models starting to reason, to think step by step, and having access to tools has been this incredible unlock for the capability of the models. And it's part of what allowed me to create that application that I showed you just a minute ago. And then the next kind of key capability or concept, and this is one that's relatively new and has certainly been talked about a lot at the moment. This is about AIs that have agency, that can act autonomously, that can make plans, that can use tools, that can adapt to the situation that they find themselves in, and to self-correct on their path to achieving some sort of a goal. One of the best examples of this is a capability that OpenAI produced called Operator. And what Operator allows you to do is it allows you to ask for something to be done. And so the example that's often talked about is someone who wanted to book a holiday. and they might type in, find me some family-friendly campsites near Joshua Tree in California. And so if they type that into this prompt box that you can see in front of you, Operator will analyze that question. It will immediately realize it needs to go to a travel website or some sort of campsite booking site. It will open up a web browser. It will enter that URL. It will go to that website. It will look on that website where the text entry is for the sort of thing that that my user's looking for. So family-friendly campsite in Joshua Tree. It might, if it was given the dates that you're looking to book, it might do the little, date picker and then create a list of options, and then at that point it might ask the user to confirm what option that they want to take. And so while travel bookings kind of a little bit of a naff example, a lot of white collar work, so the work that myself and many others do, involves interfacing with lots of different software tools and moving, in order to do a job, say a claims processor for an insurance company or someone answering complex customer inquiries, might need to move across multiple systems within their desktop at their work. And so when you've got capabilities like agentic AI and Operator, it really opens up the possibility to have automation of far more complex white collar work. So that's the end of part one. I'll go on to part two, and just a bit of a time check. So I guess 5 thoughts that I often have when I'm thinking about use cases and particular AI projects that we might go after. One of them is that quite often the driver of these AI projects is to try and take cost out, and that's great, and we definitely should be trying to do things more efficiently. But the thing that I also try and turn my mind to and balance out is, what are the other things that I could be doing for customers or perhaps other stakeholders that I've always wanted to do, but that haven't been possible because I haven't had the resources, or I haven't had the capability to be able to do that. And getting the balance between those two, and obviously different stakeholders within a large organization are going to have a bias to either cost out or do more for a customer. And so one of the examples, like a real example here, is we're building an AI that is able to replicate how a particular group of consumers may respond to a particular product idea or communication. So basically, like a synthetic focus group or research panel. And so through one lens, you should say, okay, great, we can now do focus groups and research using AI, so we can save the cost of going out and paying a third party for that. So that would be one lens. Another lens is, well, what are all the situations or times in the general operations of my business where I might want to get customer feedback, but I haven't in the past because it's expensive and I need to go and engage a third party. And so getting that balance between doing a lot more research and getting a lot more feedback from customers or from potential customers versus trying to save money. So, a key consideration. The second one is, what's the human machine mix going to be like in the organization? And so, a couple of things to think about here. Absolutely, many employees today really want to get access to AIs to help them be more productive. I've rolled out AIs to teams of hundreds of people, and we're getting about 70% long-term adoption of those new software tools, which is something I've never I just haven't experienced that with other types of technology. So they want it, but they definitely need help to be able to learn the skills to be able to use that AI effectively. The second thing is it's really hard to buy all the AI talent that you need to build out an organizational capability around AI. There just aren't that many people out there. It's a very new technology, and there's a lot of competition for those people in the workspace. And so it's important to build it, build your own. It takes time, but it's definitely necessary. The third thing is it's easy to equate this new form of AI with needing data and AI scientists in order to build out your use cases and to make use of this technology. What we've found is it's generally not the case. Your OpenAI and your Google and all of these providers of the models, they've generally done the AI data scientist work for you. And what we're doing when we're building out software internally to use this AI is we're consuming that work that they've done as opposed to having to create it ourselves. And then finally, working with all sorts of people across the organization, curiosity is the number one trait that I've found to be most correlated with people successfully adopting AI. And you want it adopted because it's absolutely the human and the machine working together that gets you the value. Governance, quite a bit to unpack here, and we can do some more in the Q&A. There's definitely new risks around the use of generative AI. A couple, just to call out here is IP infringement. Who owns the IP that's generated out of these large language models? They can hallucinate. They could make things up. They're not the information that they produce can't always be relied upon. And then if you're using your own organization's data in the use and feeding that into these models as part of your business processes, being very careful that proprietary information doesn't leak. But I think the good news is that I've found that plenty of your existing controls will help cover off some of these new risks, not all of them, and you definitely need to go through and do those exercises, but things like having the right contracts in place. People who have been developing models, organizations that develop models will almost always have a model risk management process in place, and of course, cybersecurity. And getting this governance set right up front is important because the people who are going to be really bullish for this technology are going to need the right guardrails to keep everyone safe. But also the people who are more risk adverse and bearish within the organization will get a lot of comfort from those guardrails, and so that will help adoption as well. Ethics, there is absolutely a session on its own. A lot of very, very tough questions. Whenever I talk about AI with teams, I almost always get each of these questions come through. I truly think that answers to some of these ethical questions are still eluding us, but it is, I think, important that we're at the absolute minimum thinking deeply about them and having our own perspective, especially when we're leading change and leading the adoption of these technologies. Bias and fairness is a really important one. These models are trained on all of the sum total of human written output available on the internet for better and for worse. So absolutely, it's appropriate to think about bias and fairness in the outputs from those models. Deep fakes is an incredible risk. The disinformation and misinformation, potential for this technology, I think should be worrying us all. Lots of consideration around creators' rights. So artists who have generated all this fantastic artwork over time, and then the models being trained in part on their creative output, and what does that mean for the value that we place on that art. The transparency, how are these models actually making decisions and coming up with with their outputs? It is a bit of a black box inside. And so if it does come out with the wrong thing, it is often hard to understand exactly where it got things wrong. The environmental impact, these are very power hungry machines. The electricity demand of these large data centers is just absolutely incredible. And as we all know, the world is certainly facing it's some really critical challenges when it comes to producing electricity in a environmentally responsible way. And then, of course, there's the impact on employment. Starting to see this be talked about quite a bit. I think AFR had a piece not that long ago on it. I think certainly over the medium term, there are some real considerations for everyone around, what does this mean for white collar, middle class in employment? So big, tough questions, and I give them a lot of thought, but I certainly don't. I don't have very clear answers on all of them. I think they're really quite tough questions. And then finally, and this one's a bit techie, but I did want to include it because it's, if people are looking to invest in this technology, I think it's just a couple of learn from some of the challenges that I've had. On the right-hand side is a bit of a kind of an illustrative example of what the tech stack looks like for these AI applications. And so I'll just quickly talk about it from top to bottom. So the first thing is the user interface. So this is how the person who's interacting with the AI engages with it. It might be through a web client or something else. Then there's the business logic. And so this is where you basically bridge the gap between what it is that the user is wanting and what the AI model is able to return. And this, I think, brings me to one of the first traps, is the models as they stand today are as dumb as they're ever going to be. Like, they are just going to get more and more intelligent. And so one of the mistakes that I made early on was to overcome a lack of intelligence in the model to solve a particular problem I was asking it to solve. I spent quite a bit of time in the business logic layer breaking that. This is writing code to break that problem down so it could be feeded piecemeal across to the AI model to be able to get a quality response. But then fast forward 6 months and the next version of the AI model comes out and it's smart enough that most of that business logic is then redundant. I could have just waited 6 months and wouldn't have had to have invested in all that code. The final, and so then you've got the AI model there, and so that's whether you're using GPT from OpenAI or Gemini from Google or these model providers. There's no one obvious choice at the moment for model providers. Anthropic, Google, and OpenAI, their frontier models, so their most advanced models, are all basically as smart as each other. It's definitely horses for courses, like some excel at different things. But I think, if you are looking at, investing in this capability and building this stuff out, just be careful about backing a particular horse and, tightly coupling yourself with that provider, because it could be 6 months down the line, one of the competitors comes out with some new model that blows everyone away. It's just moving so fast. And then the final point here is just, if we think about like competitive moats and how a particular organization can guard itself against competitors, access to these models is like anyone can access these models, any organization. And so the thing that's really kind of that will set one organization apart from another is its ability to use its own proprietary data. So absolutely use the smartest off-the-shelf models that you can, but then spend the money on getting your own data into the right shape so that it can be used to support those generic models in your business processes, whatever they might be. So that was the 5 considerations. Just a really quick recap. You know, the AI, it's clearly not new, but there is this new type of AI that is really disruptive. The fact that it's multimodal, excuse that spelling mistake, is really critical. They can reason and they can use tools, and that makes them more useful. And then there's this kind of emerging concept of AI agents, which is AI that has agency. And then just to recap, those 5 considerations is just balancing the cost with capability, getting that human machine organization right, you know, getting your governance right, you know, being clear about what your perspective on those key ethical questions is, and then just recognize that models are just going to keep on getting smarter. So that's the end of what I wanted to go through. Hopefully that was of interest. We now have some time for some Q&A.
Right. Thank you, Dylan. As often happens, too often for me, is you're a bit nonplussed at the end of the presentation. But let's start on one of the points you just finished with, because it's top of mind, and that is the importance of proprietary data. Because you, working for one of the big 4 banks, are uniquely privileged. If we think about who's got data sets about their customers, we know that it's Qantas, we know that it's the card services, Visa, MasterCard especially, and we know it's the banks. And after that, the data set knowledge tails away to a very large extent. In the commercial sector, we've got banks and utilities exchanging data on the past and cards, but in the government sector, we have these rules about privacy which don't apply in the private sector. Don't apply much. But what does this mean for the structure of business, and who's going to advance this?
Well, so firstly, I think I might just, and maybe it was the way that I talked about it, but definitely that kind of those large data sets, like, you know, quant type data sets is important, and if you have them, you should use them. But I don't. That kind of structured data, like customer data or transactional data or so forth, is only one type of data. I think the unstructured data that all professionals have, you know, their proprietary approaches to doing the thing that they do, as an example, specific things relating to a particular product or service that they offer, whether they be instructions or FAQs or design documentation or so forth. All of that is, you know, I would consider as part of that diagram as the proprietary data. Now, you're not training an AI or, you know, building a custom model on it, but the way that you use that data is that you ask the large language model to refer to your data in its response that it's providing back to you. A little bit like we saw those models going off and searching Google. Instead of searching that, it searches your own corporate intranet or your own file system of all the projects that you've, you know, the proposals that you've written over the years, or the projects that you've executed, and that's another form of proprietary data, which I think many more organisations have access to.
Right. Okay. Talking about expert systems, I think that the medical and legal professions have been major users of expert systems, which are not now what we're talking about, because they're so narrow and specialized. But I have the impression of great success and a lot of concern. In fact, I've got books on my shelf about the end of the legal profession, written back in about 2008 by leading thinkers in the UK on the impact of expert systems on the legal profession. Can you comment on these expert systems?
Oh, look, it's so I think the way that you've described it really kind of calls out the criticisms, which is that they are very narrow, they're very rules based. You need to do a couple of things. You need to collect a whole heap of data about that particular domain or the expertise. You need to parse that and turn it into decision trees and logic and so forth, and everything becomes kind of quite hand coded and linear. And so one of the first problems that you have is it's hard to scale. It's expensive to build, and then it's hard to scale. It's also quite difficult for it to step anywhere outside of the rails that it's been built upon. And so all of those barriers is why I think that this current this generative AI has really kind of captured everyone's imagination, and there's so much more investment in that. I certainly remember, I think early attempts to replace legal advice with just putting a question into ChatGPT. I've certainly heard some interesting stories about that. I've heard some interesting stories about lawyers using ChatGPT to help them prepare for a case and coming undone through hallucinations, things that the AI just made up. And so my suspicion is that the real kind of expert systems 2.0 or evolution is going to be some sort of hybrid of the general intelligence that we can get from these new large language models, coupled with really tight guardrails to keep them focused in the spot that we want them to be, to avoid hallucinations and so forth. And then you get scale, the ability to deploy things quickly and get value from them.
Yes, okay. Coming back on this data, um, how do you stop this leakage? I mean, data security. This is from Freya. Her question there is, how do you stop this leakage? How do you ensure that the fact you've been using your data, how do you keep? But that's fine. How do you stop somebody else using your data or acquiring it through the use of AI?
Yeah. So personally, the first thing that I do is I go and get a room full of the smartest cybersecurity people I can to help me. And so, I think definitely relying on the expertise of people who have been looking at data leakage as a general problem, who are now starting to apply it to AI is really important. But there's a couple of things that organizations are doing. The first thing is there's a big difference between the, say, contractual and technical controls that you've got over your data when you're just using ChatGPT on your phone and you're one person just with your whatever license agreement that you've got with GPT. With OpenAI, the way that large organizations tend to do it is they'll have their own instance of OpenAI's ChatGPT hosted on private servers that are only available for use from that one organization, with all sorts of contractual requirements around not having multi-tenants or multi-customers accessing that one AI. So it's kind of like a mix of contractual and technical. The other thing is you can always be quite mindful around what sort of data you're allowing your organization to feed into these AIs, and just being quite careful about. And so one of the things that we do is we classify data from public, which is something that we have on our website, all the way through to highly confidential, which would be customer data. And we have guidelines around what classification of data is able to be fed into what models. And so while that doesn't necessarily stop data leakage, it would lessen the impact if, worst case scenario, data leakage was to occur.
Right. I'm going to move in a moment to the questions on the chat, but I've just got one final question, and that is, you've mentioned the word hallucination, and we know that GPT can invent things. It's very keen to please, and will invent stuff and suggest stuff which if you know the area, is often not true, not correct. So we've got hallucination, but we've also got fake news as a major issue, particularly where what is true is what I assert seems to be the game coming out of our political system, particularly in the US. Um, but it's a general problem. What are the safeguards? How do we recognize hallucinations easily? Is there any way of tracking this and monitoring this using AI itself? And how do we pick up fake news? Where's the app which is the fake news identifier and the hallucination identifier?
I'm going to have I'm going to have a better answer for the first one than the second one. The second one is hard. Like that is um, there's a lot of culprits there, not least of which is the way that our social media algorithms, optimize to outrage and all sorts of, emotional reactions to fake content so there's a whole, I won't have a particularly good answer on that front. On the first bit, hallucinations are interesting. So there's a couple of things, and you're right. Like the language that you used was fantastic to say that's eager to please. And one of the terms that I used when I was talking about the evolution of AI was I mentioned reinforcement learning, and one of the ways in which ChatGPT in particular was trained to become so effective and such a fantastic app for us to use is through having thousands and thousands of people using an early release of it and giving a thumbs up or a thumbs down based on the response that the ChatGPT gave to a question. And then that thumbs up or thumbs down was used to train the underlying weights and biases of the parameters about what a good answer looked like or not. And so, unfortunately, the unforeseen consequence of that was that a lot of those thumbs up were not, yes, that is a factually accurate, 100% right, great answer. It was, yes, I liked that answer. And so, those early models were absolutely trained to please. So that was a good turn of phrase. So there's a couple of things that you do. One thing that we do is we always have a human in the loop, we call it. So there's always, regardless of what the output from these generative AI tools is, there's always a human who looks at it before that output goes off to do something consequential. It's worth having that that human in the loop. The efficiencies and productivity savings that you're getting through the automation is so great that having one person there checking stuff makes a lot of sense. So that's one thing that we do. The other thing that we do is the different models over time are assessed on their innate likelihood to hallucinate, and so that's something that's metricated. And I'm not super familiar with the testing methodology, but I would imagine that it is a mixture of AIs reviewing other AI output as well as experts reviewing output. And then the final thing I'd say is the more niche, the more specific, the more targeted the area that you're evaluating the output, the more likely you are to see there be a hallucination. So if a particular world expert in a very particular niche field was to ask ChatGPT about something to do with that field, then I would absolutely expect GPT to get it, at least half wrong. And so you just got to be really careful when you're going into those very narrow specialist fields. But when you keep it general and you use these high quality models that have been well tested and you have a human in the loop, you don't completely eliminate the risk, but you definitely lessen it.
Okay, so what you've basically said is there's a new role for what we might call the NAB internal auditor.
Possibly checkers, lots of checkers.
Yeah, but seriously, this is a role that can only be done, only be supported in larger organizations. The idea that you're going to have somebody who's highly technical, highly skilled, you've got to have your key managers or your key experts from inside doing this audit role. Could we set up an alternative set of prompts which allowed us to emphasize accuracy as opposed to liking pleasure?
Oh, no, absolutely, and that's very much par for the course with all of these application developments. Like I mean, um, think very carefully is a phrase that's often used in prompts, and the LLMs respond respond well to it. In the early days, I even heard of people saying, "My career depends on the accuracy of your answer," as one of the prompts that were put in there. Now, I don't see too much of that being done at scale. I think the hallucinations that we saw in the earlier models have lessened greatly. But yeah, that is definitely something that's quite commonly done is prompting the models to be to think carefully and to be as accurate as they can be. It's weird how human when you are writing these prompts and you're writing these codes, how often you start thinking about a particular human or a type of human in your mind when you're writing these prompts for these AI platforms. One of the, I guess, personas that I have in my mind is I imagine someone who's very, very smart and very, very patient, but just has no context about the particular job that I'm asking them to do. And so my job as the prompter is to phrase my question as clearly, or my request as clearly as I can, and to give the model as much context as possible, very similar to the way I might engage with a new member of my team or a graduate or something like that. It's an interesting thing that everyone who works with these models, kind of tends to talk to them like humans.
Right. One of the questions that's come up is from Alistair, or a comment from Alistair Fisher, is that machines apparently don't have a conscience about what's moral, what's immoral. What prevents the machines from making humans obsolete? But taking the first part of that, what is moral, what is immoral? The machines don't have this. We've got to tell them. They're sequential, I think, as you've said, if they're generative, essentially. They're sequential. They're looking at data. They're very good at analyzing the data, but they don't actually know the real world at this stage. Can we impose those moral strictures, if we wish to, into our prompts or into the whole mechanism?
Yep. So there's a huge body of knowledge and set of experts in this space. Model alignment is the general term that's used. And what's meant by alignment is, how do we align the outputs of the model to best line up against our wishes as humans, which should encompass all those, doing the right thing and so forth, which I suspect that question's relating to. And so all of the large model providers have huge model alignment teams, and their job is to do, through all sorts of technical means, try and create the right outputs from these models. Now, that sometimes goes to the extent where their efforts are so great that it brings up another problem, which is, whose morals are these models being aligned, right?
Yep.
And so one of the, is it tending into the realm of censorship and again, this is another one of these big ethical questions that I don't have a particularly good answer for, like a concrete answer for. other than to say that it is absolutely critical that we continue to assess the outputs of these models to make sure that if we do see signs that they're doing the wrong thing, that we've got the right safeguards in place and we can pull the plug out on them as quickly as possible. And we just have to hope that there's enough competition and enough different players in the market building these models that we get a decent spread of morals and different alignment focuses, and we can make our own choices about which model we use.
Yeah. Okay. So that's about so what you're raising the question then is whose model is it really? Whose value function, whose moral strictures, if any, are imposed in the model, right? Uh, but that's one issue, and that's a major issue. It comes down to, if you like, I agree, it's either censorship or it's imposing, let's call it a Trumpian world of anti-DEI. But the other question is, when we've built these models and we've used ChatGTP or Gemini or any of the others, who owns the model?
Well, the ownership of the model is relatively clear. So the ownership of the model is, I mean, that's the work product of the company that's done the training on that model, and I don't often hear that being talked about as being in dispute. What you do hear being disputed in certain corners is the model output. And in particular, when a model is, so as an example, if I was to ask ChatGPT to create an image for me in the style of Banksy, of the artist Banksy, and it created an image that looked like Banksy had produced it, there's a lot of conversation around, well, there was a lot of that artist's creative output and IP and just hard work produced a bunch of pieces of art that model was trained on, so then it could replicate it. So far, there is for a large organization that's using these models, you have most of the model providers will indemnify you against loss from third-party claims. So that's one of the things that OpenAI, I'm pretty sure Gemini does it. They do that because it's recognised as this is a real stumbling block for especially large corporates. So that's kind of the risk and the mitigant to the risk, but the ethical considerations around it are absolutely not resolved. Like there is no, I certainly haven't heard, a particularly sensible way in which the original developers of those IPs can be compensated when that IP is used to create something that's that is new in the future based on being trained on that stuff. I haven't, as far as I'm aware, there's not a good answer to that.
Right. Are you aware? I mean, there's two ways to clarify that. One's through the courts, that is interpreting existing law, and the other is to bring down new law. Are you aware of, from your reading, any moves in Europe or the EU or in the States or Canada or anywhere to deal with this?
Not that. I'm not aware of that, and I think, and this is kind of almost another ethical consideration, is that these open AIs and Google, these are these humongous companies with a lot of legal firepower. So them providing the indemnity is based on their belief that they can duke it out in the courts and win, or that there would be so few claims made against them that the revenue that they generate from offering those models is. So like even that's got I think some interesting ethics to it. The regulation or the around this stuff tends to be more around what are the what are the consequences of these models being able to do things that are kind of counter to that alignment that we were talking about before? And if these models could be used for, say, developing code for cyber attacks, or for producing these horrible deep fakes that we see from time to time. And so I think it's more about those sort of unforeseen, or not unforeseen, foreseen, but undesirable outcomes of the models that most of the regulation that I'm aware of seem to focus on. But then, of course, what we're seeing now is even that conversation around regulation being, people taking a step back, because there's such a belief that there's an arms race between the West and China in developing these AIs, and any regulation that we put on, these companies that are producing it in the West is just going to tie one arm behind their backs. And China might end up winning the race to super intelligence and artificial general intelligence.
Right. Okay. But I think what you were saying is, Rob Millen had asked, does our intellectual property law have any future? And you were saying, well, it's pretty much an open game at the moment, where might makes right.
Yeah, that's how it looks to, and certainly not a lawyer, but that's how that's how it looks to me as a practitioner. And I think it comes down to the ethics of the people involved.
Yeah. Okay. This is a management comment from me. It's now 6:35, and I don't want to hold everybody for too long. But if we go on for another 5 minutes, and then including thanking Dylan for a terrific presentation, but we've still got a lot of questions on the chat function, which are not touched on as yet. One's from Joel Burns, who's asking. Yeah, he says access to large language model, more or less free, or in the case of a product like Google's Notebook, is actually free. But what point does this giant free lunch come to an end? Joel's clearly an economist, not believing in free lunches. But what risks are users exposed to when it comes to this? Is this all going to change? How is this going to be dealt with? What are the implications for investing in these things in-house, or versus continuing to use the cloud platforms?
What a fantastic question. So I'm a free user of Notebook, LM as well. So I think Google has this really kind of long history of making products that are fantastic and free, and people get reliant on them, and then sometimes those products become monetized. Like Google figures out, like goes, yes, this product is good enough, there's enough demand for it, and we're going to find a way to charge for it, which they've done for their domain hosting and their email platforms, which was quite a bit freer for a long time. So I think definitely in the Google ecosystem, you should expect stuff that's free today. You're probably just the market test for that product, and at some point in the future, if they can fit, they'll either kill it or find a way to charge for it. I think you kind of like just brush up against a really interesting question, which I don't know a huge amount about, but I do read about from time to time, which is the level of capital investment that is going into building out these massive data centers to with the view that there is going to be so much paying demand for the intelligence from these large language models that those people making those investments, well into the billions of dollars, are going to get a return over time. I think if there is any sort of a bubble or any sort of winter or correction, it may come from that demand, that paying demand not materializing, and all of a sudden, we've got all of this compute capability built. Again, I don't know a huge amount about it, but I think that's an interesting spot to watch. Are these big companies going to continue to build out these, billion dollar plus data centers on the hope that demand will come?
Right. Okay. We certainly did have you've mentioned the winter, these when neural put forward and people just moved right away. Hello, I've lost.
Yep. No, no, I've got you.
All right. My screen just went blank. I don't know why, but it did.
Oh,
That's,
well, we can still see you. Yeah.
oh, that's good. Thank you. Okay. We had this, it's thrown me a bit. We had this winter, but the real question is, um, you know, are we going to get a winter again? And you've identified one major risk. But we've also talked about free lunches, and the big free lunch, which you've already mentioned, is that Google gave away as basically open source. They published a paper on it. They said this is the transformer. Was that 2017, 2018? But that was an
17.
enormous free lunch to the US and to the world and to China, right, as to this transformer technology. Um, did they realize what they
I
were?
don't think they did. I don't think they did. It wasn't until it was really scaled with more data and more compute that that I'm sure there were a few people who realized, oh, hey, this could be something, and let's go and spend a bit of money to see how it plays out. And I think OpenAI did a great job of that initially. But yeah, no, I think generally people think that I mean, Google was trying to solve a problem of translating words from one language to another as part of that. Like
Yeah.
that's what they were trying to do there. To then think that that was going to be able to write code and applications like I showed you. Like I don't think anyone was thinking about that. Hey, John, I know I'm breaking protocol, but I see there's a question here about DeepSeek. Do you mind if I take that one quickly?
No, take that question. Yes.
All right, I sometimes talk about this, and basically the question is that when the DeepSeek models, the Chinese-based model was announced, and its intelligence was seen to be as good as the leading Western models, and it was claimed to have been trained on a much smaller amount of initial capital, there was a big sell-off in tech stocks because people were like, oh, is this do we really need these billions and billions of dollars worth of chips and so forth? And it was an incredible thing. Could that happen again? Quite possibly. I think some of the really interesting things that have happened with the more recent Chinese models, which haven't resulted in such a reaction from the markets, is that they are finding novel ways to be more efficient with their use of compute. So effectively, put simply, they're able to create models that are quite smart using inferior technology, and while the whole world's effort on building out these large language models has largely been almost entirely built on NVIDIA chips because of a particular piece of software called CUDA within NVIDIA. Some very recent, I think they were Alibaba models, but I'd have to double check that. Smart AI models out of China were built using Huawei chips. So, all of these controls we've got about NVIDIA selling their chips into China. China just figured out a way to make chips that they could use for for AI models. So I think that's probably the latest development in the East-West NVIDIA chip kind of conversation.
Right. Okay. Good. Thank you for picking up on DeepSeek. Um, that winter and that disruption goes back to how does one invest in this area? Should one be investing given the PEs and how do you, what stands out? That's a question which we had from Cheryl Horton, but
Look, that's well beyond my. I'm just a humble practitioner.
all right. Well, we might give that to people like Patrick or others.
And let me know what the answer is. Yeah.
Well, hello, Dylan. Thank you, John. And I might add, it must be very nice, Suzanne and Seda. So Dylan's mother is on the call here. So very good, excellent presentation. Thank you, Dylan. And thanks for answering that question before of mine there on DeepSeek. But I mean, investment-wise, I read the other day, Dylan, it was pushed to me on Instagram, but that a simple question on ChatGPT uses 1/15 of a teaspoon of water. And,
Wow.
and it didn't refer to the energy requirement. But I suppose just looking laterally, buying the PICs during the gold rush is energy companies is a way to make money out of this. I don't understand the technology.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it's the electricity does feel like the picks, if not the chips, but the critical underlying enabler. I think you're right.
Yep. Now, I'm going to sadly close this because we're well over time, but I think the fact that we've got still such a strong audience at this hour, we've still got 38 people online, and but I think that's fantastic. But I'm going to close that. We'll leave the site open, but I just want to foreshadow the next couple of months, if I may, before I thank Dylan, and that is we're all taking a holiday in July. It's school holidays. Some of us have grandchildren. Some of us are going to go north and sit on the beach or play games with our grandchildren. But in August, we have another outstanding speaker whose name has already been mentioned. We have Sir Bacon speaking on low orbit and high orbit satellites and getting energy back to Earth. So another club member. We're very pleased to have Sir agree to this, and that will be from memory on the 17th of August. If it's not the 17th, then it will be the third Tuesday as usual. So this series will continue, but we're taking next month off. I think it's been a terrific night, Dylan. I'm so pleased that you are a member of the choir and that we were able to discuss this presentation over several weeks and just understand just how important this would be to our members and our guests. So I think the fact we've got 38 people still online is a testimony to that. Yeah, and I think that's great. We had, by the way, well over 80 registrations, but that illustrates that the realization factor is not always 100%. So thank you muchly, Dylan, and thank you all for being online. We'll keep the site open, and Dylan, if you want to ask or answer any more questions, that's fine. But as we often do with the club, we need to let people go at some stage and let the others stay. So thank you.